Charles Lakofsky teaches ceramics at Bowling Green State University in Ohio.
Well, I've enjoyed working in the other media, but I think it's the feeling of directness, an immediate response to the material, particularly because the hand is very often the tool. I think another thing that fascinates me about clay is this metamorphosis through which it goes, that it starts off soft and plastic and gooey and very responsive, and it ends up so permanent. This is just fascinating to me. And that's so often just the mark of a tool or just a touch of the finger. And once the thing comes out of the kiln, it's there. There are a few technical factors concerning porcelain. First of all, the whiter I want the clay body to be, the more kaolin it has to have in it, the less ball clay, consequently the less plastic it's going to be. It requires a certain finesse in handling, really, a minimum of handling in throwing. You can't take a nice flared bowl and baby it too much, or it just gives up and collapses. And I found that one of the things which will work quite well in throwing relatively thin porcelain things is to put them together in sections. Now, in the covered jars, which very often have a definite shoulder on, I find it much easier to throw the jar, allow it to stand for an hour or two until it gets to this not leather hard stage, but kind of stiff stage, and then throw the shoulder onto it. I think a lid has a function on a piece of pottery. We're either preventing something from getting into the jar or something from getting out of it. Now, whether it's moisture getting out of candy or what have you, or keeping the flies from getting in, I think it's a matter of closing the thing off into a solid volume. And I like lids that fit. I don't like lids that kind of fit. And you put them on and they slide and slop around and fall into the pot. I like them to lock in place and stay there. Often when I pick up a brush full of pigment and start to splash, I wonder how free I can get with it, and I often think of it as, rather than being free brush, just liberated brush. There is a certain amount of control to it, but some discipline too. One of the reasons I like wax resist on a stoneware bottle is I think that so often there's a richness to the clay that can play such a happy little game with the richness of the glaze. I don't know, sometimes just the way the wax brush kind of caresses the surface of the pot and the glaze just peels away, it's just fun to do. And in the end, the thing is a happy balance between the two.
William Wyman is a professional potter who operates the Herring Run Pottery in East Weymouth, Massachusetts.
The water runs right by the side of the building in a moat and drops 10 feet in a waterfall right outside the windows where I throw. Recently, I finished a large commission of making some very huge urns for trees for a public shopping plaza. And I've done hanging planters, one of the things I love to do the most. I make ashtrays, I make vases, and I make storage bowls and serving bowls and mirrors and other decorative accessories for the home and so forth. The first things I made were vessels. In other words, they had an opening at the top, and technically they could still be used as vases. But only recently I began to realize that no one was ever actually going to put any flowers in these things, or branches and so on, even though you could. And I really recently came to the conclusion that I didn't want anyone to do that either. So therefore, why not close them? I finally got the nerve to close them recently, which kind of cuts the last tie with a function. And so the things now have to stand on their aesthetic quality and their content. I worked out a way of rolling a very large slab, which I then call raw material, by simply rolling out smaller pieces that weigh about 20 pounds each and dropping them down onto a table which is covered with newspaper, and overlapping the separate pieces and slamming them together and ultimately rolling them all together into one sheet. The things are put on newspaper because as the clay dries, it will be able to slip along the layers of newspaper and won't catch on the table because it shrinks, and if it weren't able to slip, it would crack right through the middle. I usually let my slabs cure for several days so that they get firm. They're not completely leather hard, but they are firm. I do that because I want to retain the flatness and the dimensional stability of the slab. I do not want to pick it up and bend it into a curve. I want to keep the shape basically rectangular or cube. So by letting the slab become stiff, one can handle it this way without putting dents in it when you're moving it, and since you don't want to bend it, it's to your advantage to let it be stiff because one can put up a 3-foot-high piece and expect it to stay there without collapsing. You couldn't do that with a soft piece of clay. I use heavy slip to put the pieces together, and I feel that that makes a good sound joint and really cements the things together, and very seldom do I have any open up in the kiln with a crack at the joint. I think that I'm interested in content, the kind of thing that sculpture and painting comes to grips with, rather than the functional part of the traditional concept of ceramic. I'm concerned with making the surfaces ever changing, ever variable, richer experiences, so that one can pore over every square inch and get constantly changing, surprising experiences and results and feelings. Of course, I hope the whole thing will add up to something significant. I'm very happy, I'm very enthusiastic with the status of craftsmen in the world today. I think that we're over the hump. We've made a breakthrough. We're recognized now. It's a lot easier than it was 15 years ago.
Near Concord, New Hampshire, is the studio of a husband and wife team of potters, Vivika and Otto Heino.
For 15 years we've been teaching, always with the idea that we were going back to our studio. And now that we're in a studio, and not to be too tense, I've started throwing off the hump. You can get into the rhythm of throwing, the wheel hardly stops except to lift off the pot. And in this way I'm trying to free myself so I can get back into real potting.
I start first with 10 pounds of clay, wedge it up, and keep wedging it, cut it, and see if there's air out. Get it to good consistency that when you press your finger into the clay, it resists it quite a lot. It dents a little, but it resists it. Then I make 5 of them, and then I wedge them all, and I put what's nearest to me onto the wheel head so that the clay is already going in a circular motion when I spiral the clay to put together. So that helps you in your center. It gives the clay the right motion. When it's absolutely centered at the wheel, especially at the wheel head, there is empathy with the clay that you know the clay is centered and the clay knows it's centered. And then you make it. It's like everybody has different ways of communicating to the clay, and this is the way I communicate to the clay before I make a shape. It's that oneness with the clay. I like to throw large pots, so I start with 50 pounds or more clay. And the thing is that throwing large pieces, I sit the center and then I stand the throw. The reason for this is that the wheel is low, so when you stand, well, you got that much more height to make in your pot. How many pounds of clay is determine how high you can go, and it takes about a pound to the inch. So if you got a 50-pound ball of clay, if it's 8 inches in diameter, you ought to be able to get up 30 inches high, approximately. It's a challenge. Every time I go to the wheel, it's a challenge to me. So it's a thrill when I see this pot just grow right up in the air. Even I surprise myself a lot of times that I don't know how it's got up there. I make a lot of bottles because I guess I'm noted for bottles from east to west and west to east, because, I don't know, people just pick them up and they never set them down. They buy it and walk off with it. I sell a lot of little ones, a lot of big ones, medium size, depends. I like to make them, and every time I make one, it's always a little bit different. And I always figure that the next one I make is going to be better than the one I made before. The bottle, I try to give the feeling of blowing out, stretch the clay out so it looks like that it invites you to go over there and pick it up. The middle of the bottle or the shoulders are wider than the bottom or the top. I try to get across the delicate-looking pot, but a strong pot, that it shows that the person who made it was a strong person.
I think that many people who want to be a professional potter don't realize that they have to do some little things, and for every big pot Otto does, he also does little pots and little bowls and bottles and ashtrays, and sometimes you're tired after doing these big things, and it's very relaxing to just do a series of ashtrays. I don't think that it's boring to sometimes do the same orders. It's a challenge to see if you can do quantity and have them with the same quality. I think it would be boring if we did ashtrays day in and day out, but sometimes it gives you time to think of other things while you produce these. Now, I don't think that somebody should work the way I do, each to his own. Many people want to know how we work from the standpoint they see Vivika and Otto on the bottom of the pots. The students used to look at the bottom and they'd say, oh, well, Vivika made this because it's written, and Otto made that one because it's printed. But sometimes this throws him off because he signs a pot that I've made because I've forgotten to, and I sign a pot he makes, and especially on large ones, he can't always sign the bottom of a big bowl and hold it, so he holds it up and I sign it. But many of the pots that we make, we have decorated each other's or glazed each other's. People think this is strange, but I think it's because we feel the same way about form, and our shapes are very much the same way, that we more or less know what the other one is going to do, or if I do it for Otto, I more or less know what he was going to put on it. In trimming, I think we both feel that you start at the bend where you've had to leave a little bit of clay for support, and then while you're trimming up on the wheel, you're really trimming your bottle back down to the base.
I make the pot for my own enjoyment, and if someone else buys and likes it, I'm thrilled. The pot should stand on its own merit. It can be in a museum or it can be anywhere. The pot should speak for itself.